So good afternoon. I'm very happy to be here. It's been here a few times, but I'm sure these are all new faces since it was a few years, I guess, my last lecture here. And I'm very happy to see leadership of the university, the new dean, major professors. Fulvio has been working with us, and some of his great buildings are just finishing. And so he's been with you a few years. In the meantime, these buildings get constructed, and he can just, go have a look at them and enjoy his work. So I'm going to talk about architecture and urbanism for the 21st century knowledge economy. So I want to connect up what we're doing architecturally, the way we develop a new paradigm and style and sets of repertoires and values, how this connects up with socioeconomic transformations, innovations, so that we are up to date, that we are moving with history, with the development of society. And that's not always happening within the field. The field oftentimes, through a number of inertias, partly also political inertias, which don't give much room for innovative building, is a little bit behind, I feel. And you can develop buildings which might have been designed 100 years ago and nobody finds it curious. I do. So what we're looking at here with our work is 21st century and could only have been created in the 20th century with fully exploiting the computational means of design, but also fabrication, but also, that I'm not going to focus on this here, but also testing and simulating social functionality of complex buildings, etc. So that's truly 21st century in the sense of couldn't have been done 50 years ago. But also I think it reflects more the complexity and dynamism of contemporary cities and what we would require. Okay, so just a glimpse of the repertoire. So it's very diverse, rich, the kind of morphologies employed, the materials, the textures, and there's a kind of diversity and richness which I would claim and argue exceeds, in terms of versatility and diversity, everything, all the previous styles put together. But yet it also has an internal coherency, so you can recognize what belongs to that era, to this kind of body of work. I call it parametricism, and the latest stage I call tectonism. Because what you can notice is the complexity, differentiation, but also the coherency and unity across differentiation and versatility. It's the capacity to adapt, the internal, let's say, deep spaces with intervisibility and deep layered spaces, etc. That's what a lot of these buildings share, the capability to fit into complex sites and nestle in that, adapt to those also across different levels, etc., etc. So these are some of the buildings we're creating, and we're going by now through all typologies, all scales, but also including all the other design disciplines, not only urban design, architecture, but also interior design, product design, furniture design, fashion design, also graphic design, if you like. All the design disciplines are now encompassed within the firm. We're a large firm, we can do that. We continuously develop new kind of products, etc., etc. And new buildings. There's a lot of them which are cultural buildings, or landmarks where society wants to, or city wants to have a heightened sense of itself as a place of cultural communication. A lot of times these buildings set up whole new districts, and their value and attractiveness kind of radiates out through the urban field around, like an incubator building. We have quite a few of those. This is just recently been completed in Zhuhai, for instance, one happening in Sanyang, Hainan, one happening in Shaoxing, close to Hangzhou. Even these were all Chinese examples, but we know also, this is Uzbekistan, so it's New Tashkent Research Center, and is similarly a iconic landmark hub for communication, exhibition, research, conferencing, and then around that a technopolis, knowledge economy district, and we are often called in to design urban fields, but also design these kind of, let's say, hub buildings, anchor buildings. And this is just an example of, we're interested to the detail of structure, fabrication, optimization through technological means. And you can see that the diversity of morphologies and patternings and materialities is further enriched than the previous stages of parametricism. So that's what I call tectonism. And there's a sense of beauty. It's really like the endless forms of nature. But what's particular about natural formations and anorganic and organic is that they are outcomes of processes of adaptation, of forces being absorbed, reacted to. They're not invented, but they're kind of evolved into, in particular with organisms, with the success criteria. So, and that is, you can perceive that. And these are also all products which are hyper evolved with their optimized functionality. And that's why they don't end up like boxes and undifferentiated grids, which you don't find for good reason. You don't find such forms in nature. Anyway, so this is obviously, to develop this capacity requires a lot of skills, a lot of insights, and collaboration with experts, but there's a lot of help, a whole universe of tools to anticipate and simulate some of these engineering morphologies, form finding, the topology optimization, mesh relaxations, the world of Grasshopper and its various plugins which we use. And then, of course, when it comes to realization, you bring in the engineers and experts who then kind of take responsibility for that, but you're on the right track. Hopefully, with what you do. And these are just components. In the end, it's really you're generating these urban fields, these new technopole districts, and we've done a lot of that, and that was under the heading of parametric urbanism. So the idea here is that you have that richness of buildings and certain order and hierarchy to the district, and you have variation, but you also have coherency and identity and legibility. And that's different from what happens currently in the way of, let's say, a spontaneous urban development process, which over the last 50 years generates only, let's say, disarticulated, identityless, seemingly random agglomerations, which I've been naming garbage spill urbanization. So name me any urban accumulation, agglomeration, even districts which are meant to be designed and planned, which have any sense of coherency, elegance, beauty, legibility. There aren't any. You really have to go back to the 60s, where you find, let's say Brasilia, Chandigarh, or the modernist kind of white Tel Aviv, or Art Deco Miami, where you have a certain coherent urbanism. It's relatively monotonous, no longer fit for purpose, and we can no longer plan whole districts like this because society is way too dynamic and complex. You need to allow markets to kind of come in. That's the kind of challenge. How can we maintain legibility, identity, and create urban identity and coherency in this kind of context? And that has been failing. And of course, you go further back, you have wonderfully coherent historic cities and villages. So I just wanted to focus on in a few steps reviewing the last few hundred years of the development of different urban formations and then architectural thinking and styles, tracking socioeconomic development. So feudalism under feudalism in the Middle Ages, where these cities emerged, they weren't planned. You can imagine that you start with a castle or with a small village, and then you just build out concentrically. That's a nearly natural process that doesn't require much thinking, because also kind of circular bounding is the most efficient form in terms of boundary versus area captured. And once you start this, it's so natural, you wouldn't make kind of bizarre, particularly if it's a fortified place, shape. So it's going to be a kind of circular, of course, slightly distorted because of topography, because of the river on one side. And then you build concentrically out of it. So these are natural, quasi-natural formations. And then they have a set of ingredients like the church, the marketplace, and then surrounding by more or less generic circles of buildings which are not differentiated. It's a family and site of production of the handicrafts. So when it comes to the so-called, let's say, called the Renaissance, the beginning of modernity, where you have a certain consciousness and reflectiveness, you have theory emerging and treatises emerging and a kind of design of cities emerging and architecture emerging for the first time in the Renaissance. So up to then it was just tradition-bound building. It was just done what always done. It was kind of naturally evolving, growing without much thought. And it was just a craft, not a discipline. In the Renaissance, you had obviously architects, Filareto in terms of urbanism, Alberti, who innovated, who kind of authored buildings, cities, brand new, complete designs, which also didn't exist in the medieval period. Complete designs on whole sets of drawings, plans, sections, elevations, perspective to simulate, and treatises explaining the innovations, arguing for what they were doing, and claiming individual authorship. That's what we recognize. These are architects. There didn't exist an architect before that. But what is interesting, when they came to first design the ideal city, and they were building it, so a way accelerated urbanization, they were just rationalizing geometrically and post-rationalizing also organizationally what had evolved previously. So it's basically the same thing. It's just rationalized and optimized, but then they had maybe a few more prominent buildings. This is early capitalism. This is kind of, start in northern Italy city-states. It's a new socioeconomic era, the beginning of capitalism, modernity. But then the next step and stage of what what is interesting to notice, in the Renaissance you have the simple closed form of the city. In terms of architecture, you had relatively small buildings and they were themselves self-enclosed. They had each symmetry and you would only operate additively to make a larger complex. They didn't think in terms of overarching complexes. So if you had to build a larger complex of buildings, and here it was the kind of the palace of the Medici was one building, and that was the kind of government. There was a church, so these were relatively small units. Now, I'm explaining now why the Baroque looks so different and why that makes sense. And now you have open cityscapes reaching out, encompassing and running the axis to the horizon. This is, Versailles, because you have new entities. You don't have small city-states. You have a whole integrated national economy, some of the Louis XIV's absolutism, mercantilism. It's a next stage of capitalism with a lot of royal administrative, and so and you have much larger complexes like a Versailles. Imagine you're trying to build Versailles in this Renaissance fashion. It wouldn't integrate. It would disintegrate. It would kind of fall apart, and you wouldn't have an entity you could navigate and recognize. So this kind of, and then there's Karlsruhe and these other absolutist cities. You needed a number of, and I don't have the detail here, but you have a global overarching symmetry where the asymmetric parts amplify the overall symmetry, and you have curvature to tie things together. You have deep relief, light and shadow for distance viewing. Instead of columns piling up, small columns, you have colossal orders over 3-4 levels. All of that is allowing to articulate something much larger. And so Versailles is one example. The other example is the Vatican, St. Peter's. I mean, the Roman Catholic Church in that era is nearly, was ruling over whole of Europe in terms of all the church administration, colossal organizations that were the kind of follow-on ruling organization of the Roman Empire, if you like. And look at the architecture of St. Peter's. I mean, they're complex, layered, but fully integrated compositions with all these features of colossal order, very deep relief, and so on and so forth. So that is the explanation of the Baroque. I mean, you've never heard that. It's quite original thinking, but once you hear it, you think, that makes sense. Because in Renaissance, could not have articulated that kind of large-scale entity. Now, so that was absolutism. This was the ancien regime of France, the Roman Catholic kind of. And that was basically the 17th and 18th century. And now we're hitting the 19th century. Well, first of all, what did we see? We see the French Revolution. And actually before that, a little bit before that, the Glorious Revolution in the United Kingdom. You had the Dutch Republic. So we actually have the period of bourgeois, capitalist, laissez-faire capitalist. So no longer absolutism controlling everything, meaning handing over monopolies by royal privilege to all parts of industry. You had a free, competitive process, laissez-faire, a huge dynamic. The productivity advances only kick off at that point in 1800. Absolutism did a little bit better than free, but it's basically in terms of prosperity, it was all flatlining. And then there's a hockey stick diagram where things shoot up dramatically in this period. But that meant you don't have this kind of central plan, no new Baroque city plan, no new Karlsruhe, new this. But you had a free letting rip, proliferation of industrial estates, countryside, energy, and new agglomeration, new cities. A kind of tumultuous, roaring agglomeration, like in some of these images. And it's interesting in terms of the architectural and aesthetic response. It was, on the one hand, historicism. You had many more types of buildings and more diverse. They weren't coordinated, and you had suddenly a proliferation of different styles. All the historical styles were brought to bear. A church into Gothic style, a courthouse in Doric style, a new kind of city council in the Neo-Renaissance, some administrative building in Neo-Baroque, universities, railway stations, etc., etc. And you had competitions. They started right after the French Revolution. They had a system of competitions we're very familiar with for all public buildings, and there were so many of them. And you needed the diversity of styles, which the 19th century is known for, to distinguish and express and articulate all these. But also the aesthetic. It's interesting if you read Logier, the theorist of that era, in his 3 essays on architecture, he was celebrating this kind of tumultuous, unpredictable, uncontrolled agglomeration, as I said. That's the vital. That's the picturesque is that aesthetic where you suddenly don't want these full order. You like the unpredictable, and that's what he's saying, kind of in the detail ordered, but in the overall, he wanted that disorder. So again, I'm tracking style and theory to what the requirements were of that era to flourish, and the confirmation that this was the right thing was, of course, in these incredible prosperity gains, per capita income gains, which of course it took a century. At the end of the century, that was widespread in Western Europe. Anyway, so how about this one? It's a dramatic shift. Now, again, it's a socioeconomic transformation. So we're moving from the era of laissez-faire capitalism to an era of socially managed capitalism on the one hand, but also a process of capital concentration took place. So let's say in 1850 you had 5,000 steelworks. In 1900, down to 3 in a country, or 5. You had literally, 10,000 banks condensed into 5. And then, 2, and after the socialist revolutions, into 1 state organized. But the thing is with this, and to this era you had, of course, First World War, the social revolutions, not only in Russia it went all the way to communism or socialism, but you had socialist revolutions in Germany, in France, the social democratic parties, the labor movement was to some extent in charge. The president of the new Weimar Republic was a former worker. He was a social democrat, etc., etc. And you had all these social housing programs, and you had planned city development, and the big companies, they built whole factory towns, massive plants, but also they captured the consumer products for everybody, cars, for instance, rolling out to everybody. Even before the First World War, you had started that. You had the General Electrics in Germany developing, electric products for everybody, etc. So that's the era of Fordism, and you basically have mechanical mass production. And Le Corbusier is kind of expressing this in his vision from 1922, and then reiterated in the late 20s. This kind of form of modernism where you have separating out, business district, a residential district, or logistics, retail distribution district and a factory district, separated out, each very different from the other, but each separate and internally fully repetitive. But this was working extremely well. It was another leap in productivity. Let's say if that was the 19th century was this, the early 20th century was this. Growth rapidly, and in the 60s, a whole nation like German, nation of 60 million, everybody had a car, a prefabricated house with flowing water, electricity, packaged holidays, you name it, a television with only 1 or 2 channels, etc., etc. But everybody had the same, more or less. Everybody was doing this 9 to 5, and you could separate things out. There was not much communication necessary, not much innovation potentials, because you had these massive assembly lines, fixed machinery, great to produce one product for the next 25 years, unencumbered with slight variations, and maybe add a second product. And then everybody had more or less the same. So it also meant socially, materially, it was egalitarian, because everybody will have the same car. Everybody has the same house. Everybody has the same washing machine. Everybody has the same TV station. Everybody chooses the same 1 or 2 channels. What's the point of having 5 cars? Eating, 10 times as much industrialized food. So everybody had to have this more or less the same physically a function of the physical production systems. State everything as well, state planned and so on and so forth. Of course, there were some wealthy people. They can then have these hand-tailored things which cost 1,000 times. And there's then very, very few. But you don't have everything in between, which we come to now. But this paradigm was based on this mechanical mass production. It was starting in the early 1900s. The Socialist Revolution established this, so from the 20s to the 1970s. And what happened? And socialism was a development model, so the Soviet Union was, after Stalin's crazy excesses, under Khrushchev and on, they were developing quite well. It was a modernization model. Similarly, I mean, they had problems because it was so authoritarian, but England was more or less socialist, nationalized industries, everything. So it was very similar. But why did the Soviet Union collapse? The whole Eastern Bloc disappear, and why did kind of Labour Party nationalized everything? England transformed into kind of turbo capitalism. It's technological revolution. It's the microelectronic and telecommunication revolution, right? Because suddenly you no longer have to physically tie into this. Everybody the same and very, very slow innovation, etc., etc. You could unleash, see if there's an image, from this endless mass production, which will still require a lot of people being plugged into the assembly line, into something here where all the people are no longer required. What are they doing now? And you can do much more variety of product. You can reprogram the robots, models. Not Ford T for everybody, but so you can differentiate the product, and therefore you get social differentiation, income differentiation, and you also have a kind of how you contribute this. All these people which are no longer there, where they're in the various service sectors there, but also a lot of them are in research, development, in marketing, finance, etc. Thinking about new products all the time, every product, every work, part of a project, and not just plugged into a lifetime assembly position. That dynamism is called post-Fordism. These big hierarchies and huge companies break down to outsourcing everything into networks, real-time networks distributed across the globe. A lot of independence for the departments. They kind of, freewheeling, and also no longer rolled out in suburbia. Greenfield factories, greenfield office complexes, 9 to 5, doing the same thing, whether it's insurance policy kind of administration or etc. But everybody moving back to the city center because they have to be close to each other. Because you have to communicate to the new product, how about marketing, how about financing this? All the different disciplines which need to and join technologically, because we're not just redoing what we've been done for the last 20 years. We want to do something new every year. That means a massive intensification of communication. Because it pays now to innovate. Every day you can upload now a new software service app, and spread around to billions of people. So we all should be working on innovation continuously. Or you need to reprogram the robots or 3D print products and solutions, etc. That is a massive transformation, and that's why we need a revolution also in urban development, in architecture. And the urban renaissance is part of it. So the first expression in architecture was what we call postmodernism. And as you might know, it meant back to the historic city, joining in, and the whole from 1920 to 1980 or so, these cities were all emptying out into the suburbs, including workspaces. London was shrinking all through the 20th century until about this. And then everybody moving back in. You find it everywhere. Chicago, New York, London, redensification. London is the fastest growing city of Europe. It was the kind of shrinking city of Europe before that. So the transformation is massive. Of course, we can't quite, architecture and urban planning is not allowing that to happen to the fullest. We're not supplying this density and space. Everybody wants to come in to develop their career. They know they have to be in London, or else you're stunted and left behind. But supply isn't there, so housing prices skyrocket, and you have to make hard choices. Very, very bad for society. Anyway, so you get, this is the look and feel of Fordism, Brasilia. It's endless repetition in this department. But then there's another, this is, the administrative headquarters. There's another one, residential. They're different, but then internally. And this is a kind of image of the post-Fordist agglomeration. It's kind of diversity, and this is Moscow city. But it's the same in the city of London. It's the only place in London, it's the square mile, the financial district, where the fetters are off through a historic accident of the Constitution. That you don't have that NIMBYism, that political control, where residents have the right to prevent anything which goes on. That's why the city of London is so dynamic. I mean, this is an old image. New buildings popping up all the time. You can hardly keep up with it. And that is because it's the businesses themselves who run the council there. There's no council. It's very good. for the economic, and the economic potency is amazing. I mean, the part of GDP was generated there. So this is a kind of lovely, I mean, but it's garbage spill after all. That's the problem with it. Anything can be thrown in everywhere to some extent. Of course, it's all high value, and there's some merit in the individual building. But in the urban agglomeration, it's just a menacing visual chaos. But underneath this visual chaos, at least where you have the degrees of freedom, you have an intricate, but invisible, because not articulated, programmatic order where things, when you rent the space, you look where you fit in, making these networks, and which building, close to which other companies, close to the stock exchange, close to, or you're more kind of in the law kind of circles, etc. So that is, there's a hidden programmatic order, a kind of a synergy cluster formation. The whole reason why you come there is because you want to network up with these. That's not articulated. That's a failing of our discipline. The problem is in other parts of London or the UK, that's not allowed because there's some kind of bureaucrats prescribing land use patterns which are old, not to be touched. So if you have a site, you can't bring it to the fullest productivity of uses because you're not free to program it. And that's tragic. So things are not aggregating. People therefore have to commute or waste time and take a taxi to their consultants instead of walking across the road and so on. Anyway, but on the architectural side, let's say if assuming it is a programmatically intricate order, then we should sense that, we should articulate and express these things belong together, these work more closely together than these, they all form an identity because they have something they share, they're part of this knowledge economy hub. And anyway, so we wanted to generate models which are adaptive, which are internally varied. For instance, 200 different block sizes instead of equal. Then you can self-sort and nest into this. Medium companies into medium-sized blocks, small companies into smaller blocks, larger companies into large blocks or groups of blocks connected with bridges. You can integrate with a lot of the surrounding networks. These are models of something which has coherency, open-endedness also, but identity, urban identities. Okay, so this is just this kind of summary of these alignment of styles and socio-economic epochs. But we're focusing now here on the parameters of the global post-forest network society, which shouldn't look the same, like, wants to look very different from the modernist city. And parametrism is something which evolved in parallel. It evolved the first round of responsive architecture to this, let's say, post-Fordism was postmodernism. It wanted diversity and expression of difference instead of monotony, of sameness, and didn't have a repertoire at hand, so it grabbed on, similarly to the 19th century, where they just grabbed on everything which was ever available and used everything. And so they redid this, but now with a bit more creativity. It turned kind of motif juggling, eclecticism, which is also the final phase of postmodernism. They were able to, and they used pop transformation, made it more creative than the historicism. And they were embedding into the historic center, so they wanted to also match up and embed. So that was very progressive. There were also new ideas of, intersecting spaces already. And it was called, before it was called postmodernism, they called it ad hocism, which is the idea of collage embedded in the, Charles Jenks, who is a theorist of what he then called in '76 the language of postmodernity, when this was in full blow, when it was just beginning, he had a book called Ad hocism. He dropped that and switched to postmodernism. Maybe ad hocism was not so bad. But what is interesting, so the next stage was deconstructivism. What is deconstructivism? It's the same idea of layering, of collaging, of going into historic centers with new stuff, co-optimal placing buildings right on top of existing buildings and layering different kind of substructures. And it was leaving behind the restrictions of using the historical motifs. It was more open-ended. And out of deconstructivism, which I of course remember when, Zaha Hadid Architects, one of the 7 firms of so-called deconstructivism, and many others, we evolved out of this into parametricism. And there's huge advantages of parametricism because the deconstructivism was just collaging and layering disparate things without connecting, without resonating, without gradients, and it became very quickly visual chaos. The worst kind of visual chaos you can imagine. Where you draw something and you go to the toilet, you come back to your drawing and you can't find the spot where you were working on. Because it can't find your own way in your own drawing. So how can you imagine this? I mean, anybody kind of, and one deconstructivist drawing looks, after layering it all in, it's just a piece of garbage spill. One looks the same as everybody else. So why do you generate, how can you generate identity and let's say legibility in this? No, but you have complexity, and you have contingency, and you have open-endedness, but it collapses in this kind of garbage flow. So this is something where we developed complexity, adaptability, but also coherency, variation, and a lot of these fantastic spaces where you see the things below, above, all around, deep vistas, atria, and so on. These are things, instead of having the Fordism of segmenting everything to cells or separate floors, separate buildings, where everything is kind of blind to each other because they can. In Fordism, you just concentrate what you're doing. Because it's centrally controlled, everybody's told what to do, no lateral communication required. Not many updates required. Here you need to, now in the contemporary world, you need to continuously worry about, you can't concentrate for 3 weeks. You have to kind of checking whether you're still on the right track, whether there's a new tool, a new AI thing you should be using. You're wasting your time if you don't continuously update yourself. If you don't stay in the office and here on the lunch or at the pub or go to the lecture or go to the exhibition opening, you have to live in the center and be updated, because if you're not, you're just totally wasting your time. Using old tools, not catching, a new regulation, a new kind of paper, which gives you some new insights. So anyway, so that's, isn't it true? Tokyo, it was, celebrated in the 80s because it was so dynamic. We said, don't we love the chaos of Tokyo? Yes, we love it compared to that kind of sterile monotony of a Moscow Fordist socialist suburb. Fair enough. But it's also menacing and disorienting and dysfunctional at the same time. So we need to basically reject both the monotony, let's say, of the first half of the century, 20th century, and we need to reject this visual chaos, which we still have. This is still going on today. There's nothing on the horizon which has ever been built which overcomes that. The chaos, visual chaos, which is better than the monotony, don't get me wrong. But we can do better than that. What is going on in the last 60 years. So we have this strange paradox. You have homogenization via too much difference. What does it mean? All these cityscapes look the same in the end because this proliferation of difference in a garbage spill makes all garbage spills are the same, even though the actual ingredients, if you select them out, are not the same. They're quite unique. But we can't comprehend it. This is really a perceptual barrier for us. And what I noticed, all these cities are spills. The only thing which gives shape, form, recognizability, orientation are these natural forms, like the river. If you had a valley or a hill, this is something you can hold on to. And that also forces a bit of adaptation, a bit of structure, particularly in traditional cities for sure. But so this is where you know where you are instead of being kind of lost in a spill. And so this, because a river has a direction, it has some pulse, it has some logic. And so these natural formation, you get complexity and variation, but you also get coherency and legibility, some law of transformation, some vectors of transformation which are differentiating. So we started to use these tools to generate an alternative to the endless grid. The worst of it is a square grid, because there is totally disorienting. You don't know which direction is what. I mean, if you go home into these kind of suburban row houses, you can't find your own home, even after 20 years living there. You have to concentrate to find your own house. You know, at the same time, if you're in a garbage spill, you have no clue whatsoever, because you can't comprehend 1,000 things and remember amorphous. So there's something which we develop. And we can have tools. This is the way you can develop maybe the alternative to a grid, which is a lot of variation, but you order the variation from small to medium to large, from dense to less dense, from open to closed, etc. And they have something, and you have tools to measure network connectivity values, from red, very densely connected in the field, to yellow, to blue, disconnected, which might be okay for suburban living areas. So we have a lot of tools, and we should think about all the network logics which are alternatives. If you had a grid of points and you wanted to connect them, you can do that. I mean, this is nearly not possible. From every point to every other point in a straight shot, that just consumes too much area. But you can make this kind of network, grid-like, or you can have a ring, you can have a star, you can have a branching system, a spine, a linear meander, and they're very differently. They all connect everything to everything else, but with different detour positions, but also with different ordering. A central point, a strong hierarchy, or multi-level hierarchy, or non-hierarchical, etc. So these are, let's have a kind of sociological or social political ordering import. They're not neutral, only technical issues. And you can have kind of mechanisms of simulating or optimizing a network where there's a kind of sweet spot between the total length of network and the minimization of detour system. This optimized detour system, for instance, for auto develop that. which we can often use. It's quite fascinating. And if you can compare all the different network types relative to two parameters, the total length of course a cost in terms of construction, but also a cost in terms of consuming land. And then the amount of detour you have relative to a direct shot. There are two parameters, and there's a kind of sweet spot where you get most bang for your buck in terms of most connectivity per additional road. That's curiously these kind of networks which look very similar to medieval street patterns sometimes, or where you have a kind of settlement which starts with destinations, and then there's an emergent finding of network forms. It's quite interesting stuff. And basically we're just using different tools to respond, to have centers, sub-centers, respond to topography with networks, with fabric distributions, to search for patterns and try to measure qualities out of this, and also see how much of these patterns can be evolved through rerouting, closing, opening, new paths, and so on. So you get something quite intricate and organic and legible. And so we've done this kind of techno-hub condition. I mean, let's say it's a typical industrial cluster. Let's say, how do you call it? Industry park. What is it like? Somewhere on the highway, somewhere. A zone, fence around, car parks around, bunch of buildings. We want to do a city. So these are and we want to have different hubs: a biomedical hub, an IT hub, a finance hub, and we want to integrate residences, and we want to make adaptive topography and use that, and then connect everything. So we laid out the first kind of blocks. So you have continuous curves, continuous elevational curves. Things compress, expand. There's some degree of legibility. You can use a topography. Every second street is pedestrian, every second street is vehicular, a lot of bridging, and these curves run through. So you have some kind of identity and coherency of a fabric of this district, yet leaving a lot of degrees of freedom for each architect to come in. So we've done the first 10 blocks, the master plan, and in the last 20 years it's been built out like this, and you can go quite high. But every building participates in that flow of curves. And it has this kind of deep, big buildings with atria, this kind of typology we think is right for this, and has passages going through. And so I think I'm very satisfied with this result. This is in Singapore. It's called One North. And we have a 20-year build-out with enormous degrees of freedom for the architects, but still some sense of coherency. It's not collapsed into total garbage spill. So these are the kind of models where you start with a typology, and even instead of having these 5 different topologies, you could have everything in between, from tower to courtyard, via atrium, tower, etc. Where you fragment a thing, where 3 fragments come together to make a courtyard, to make an entity, where the height is varying. So you have kind of a vast range of variability in a field like this: very small, very large, empty clearance, fly out to a network, picking up all the streets every second, third, and bundling them and feeding them through. You have cross tower and courtyard condition and everything in between, and you get density where things get tight, etc. And so these are all projects. This project, the Singapore was, roughly 20 years ago, even 24 years ago. This one was maybe 15 years ago. And you can see here, you can, on the one hand, you adapt to the historic fabric, pick up the streets, pick up the grain, and then rapidly transform into something else. But there's continuity and connection. You can predict where the big buildings are, where the small buildings are, etc. And instead of current architecture would not be able to do that. They would just create a dramatic shift to something different. In modernism, they would suddenly have a grid with big buildings, starkly next to, disconnected from the fabric. That's the modernist version. The postmodernist, let's say, or contemporary version, bar what we're doing, would be stark difference from here and garbage spill in the middle. So that's what we're up against and what we want to do. And we have typological differences, and we're looking for affiliations, how the different types become part of a system. And you have massive variation, and you can see here different districts. They follow a kind of waterline. They're different yet similar. They align. They respond. There's radiating and resonances through, and it makes more sense. And it's not a garbage spill, but it's also not monotony. And you can have, a primary station. You have an axis. You have both an axis and, let's say, a semi-radial system. And you can have skyline building up where things concentrate, et cetera, et cetera. So we have many of these. And even if you had a train station or geometric center value map, this would be land value maps. That is an underlying rationality. The land value represents desirability and productivity potential. So the city should recognize that. I would let the market follow this value map, and this becomes a density and height map, rather than some bureaucrats say, everything stops at 22 meters. I mean, there can't be any argument except, I like it, isn't it lovely that it is similar to the historic center? Aren't we kind of in love with the old days? Not if the cost is paralysis of development. And in Europe, we have been zero per capita growth for the last 15 years. I mean, it's a crime and tragedy, given robotics, giving algorithmic everything, giving AI. So it's just wasted away. And architecture is a part of it. So we're doing these kind of sketches. Sorry, we had this before. And you can use new tools. And this is old. This is AADRL kind of 15 years ago, 20 years ago. You can run different functions into each other. So they have internal coherency, but they have a lot of friction and surface interaction between each others, like these different colors, for instance. And then you can script different geometries to the vector field, picking up on density of velocity and directionality of the vector, and generate these dense fields, varied fields in context, etc., etc. And my analogy for this is the multi-species ecology. I wish this is not garbage spill, right? But of course, if you throw something at this will stick out like a piece of garbage because it's not woven in it, it's not networked in it. It doesn't follow any laws and rules. But the natural environment, they have a topography, then you have the south-facing vegetation, the north-facing. As you climb up, it becomes thinner and sparser, and then just rock, then snow, etc. The river, you can know where the water is flowing. So these things are all scripted by nature because laws of nature, rules of dependency, and that's why these are relatively ordered environments with a lot of degrees of freedom. And that's why even dumb creatures like animals can find their way in this landscape because they just have to follow the topography, they have to follow the temperature, and then they find a certain fauna and flora in their habitat because this is lawful. And our environments don't have these lawfulness. So that's why even the most intelligent person cannot find their way in it, because there's no inference potential. That's why they're degenerate environments. And so we said, okay, can we do a cultural district where we have multiple authors? And that's the thing here. So these species, they are independent. There's no, I'm an atheist, so there's no plan of creation. which they're self-coordinating through their reproduction dependencies on each other in an ecosystem. No central plan, but it evolves that order because there is a kind of evolutionary selection process and pressure. It could be very inventive, but eventually you have to find one way of surviving in this, and that, etc. So could it be in the city that you get this kind of order without central plan? Certainly have it in nature. Yes, you can. How? Well, first of all, you need to have, each sub-layer, each new entrepreneurial intervention would be like a species which has all the degrees of freedom to well adapt, fit in, and optimize for its purposes. And there are similar members of the species trying to do something similar. There are other species which are symbiotic and settle with, and so on. You can evolve that, and you can simulate this in a studio of 12 students or so, where they all do different projects, and they play from a more open-ended playbook, a paradigm which they all share, and you get a lot of variety and richness, and these are different projects, internal variety in each project. They all kind of have structural form-finding logics. They're not invented forms. And then you have different, but still quite different versions of these kind of shell logics, conic, curved folding logics, tensile logics. And there's a sense of coherency, sense of connection, etc. So that's what we're looking for. It's not perfect, but as in a beginning of something which has variety, coherency, legibility within an urban formation. And I wish the whole, but if the whole discipline would be converging, would leave these retro styles behind and converge towards parameters on its later stage tectonism, of course it's more ambitious. It's much more rationalized. It means it takes into account many more valid criteria of optimization, and therefore these optimization criteria cohere. Everybody has to deal with a similar climate and sun exposure. So they all share something which makes them similar, and you can see the sun direction on an overcast day in a field. And there's many other things which they share. So that's the attempt which we're trying to do it. Look, there's nothing perfect. These are different urban schemes and development schemes we're doing. You also embed into local climate. You embed into even, if you can learn from the vernacular of this world. There's kind of mimetic research when you're trying to learn from all the species, because they have had millions of years to adapt. They have hyper efficient and effective solutions. But similarly, there's a kind of learning from the vernacular, some kind of vernacular mimetics, because we had thousands of years of various civilizations adapting to local conditions, resource materialities, environmental adaptations, passive systems. They had to be very intelligent and clever. Exposure to rain, wind, sun, harsh weathers. They found ways to, they didn't have machines, they didn't have a glass box and burn the fuel, baby, burn. But they had to, be sophisticated. They adapted to this. And this intelligence we can retrieve, of course, not one-to-one, because we need larger structures, bigger cities, etc., etc. But anyway, so there's this kind of sense of learning from the vernaculars, etc., and developing differentiated urban fields and, adapting to landscapes and, using the opportunities. So this kind of valley, all the residences, because on the steep curve, they're small units. They're on the hill, sharing the water, and then on the plateaus you have the industrial buildings, the labs, the deeper and larger buildings, and that's an ordering capacity. Instead of saying flatten everything, grid on, and then off we go. So this is a paradigm of cherishing adaptiveness to local conditions, very site-specific, but also regional-specific, culture-specific. In China we use a lot of courtyards, and in the Middle East we use a lot of courtyard typologies. That makes the cultural sense. So we have all these kind of urban development, revitalization of a harbor into a knowledge economy hub, and a certain kind of ordering, converging all the lines onto the harbor, and still having a lot of these kind of block topologies, etc., etc. Also, some of these settlements are, harsh climates and beautiful landscapes. Building something which doesn't look like garbage, despoiling the landscape. Grow them like a species, which fits into the region, into the landscape, into the climate. And you could also be quite extraordinary, exploiting a kind of topographical condition, and using tools to explore, and these are the dependency networks. Parametric models are inherently, basically they're kind of laws of nature you script. Every action has a reaction. What are the dependencies? I mean, that's what you find in nature. You can invent them. Just to articulate, to show dependencies, to show connection, what belongs together. And it's also functional, but also it's legible. And to make strong urban form, to let people participate and not be blind to what's where. And if there's a hierarchy, if there's a kind of central place which everything should relate to, and you can express that across highways, across distance. And we do this, and how do you generate unity across this huge cut of the highway? And this animation here is running against the grain of the highway, So this is strong form, legible form, generating an identity which yet embeds into the condition. I mean, it's difficult. If you embed into garbage, still it's hard. But we have these kind of attempts to generate a legible form where the skyline tells you how to move, where you're not in a city, you're desperately looking at that blue dot on your iPhone, GPS, and therefore you don't perceive anything. You just panically that you find a spot. And then you only go to the spot you wanted to go to. You're not browsing with a sense of continuous, easy, intuitive orientation and focus on what you put. You subliminally, where you are. You keep kind of understanding. You're moving down the gradients, like a bacteria moves down the nutrition gradient. And these are kind of models we have, blocks, but open blocks, penetrable blocks. The crescendo of building up height, bridges, atria, courtyards, etc. And again, so this is a new London scheme at AADRL. We had 3 schemes between the City of London, Square Mile, the financial district, and Canary Wharf, which is kind of unutilized wasteland, frozen in time, whopping, low-grade utilization, because we don't touch this kind of these are 2-story row houses. They're sacrosanct. Some people have gifted these places, and they can prevent anything and everything, and kind of, kill the GDP development of the whole nation because they want to be cozy. No, we shouldn't do that. We need to let rip and let everybody from the whole of Europe come to this great metropolis and become hyper-productive, instead of kind of shriveling and wasting away in some suburb or provincial town. So this is what a team of 3, 4 can generate, and these schemes, and go all the way to the structural optimization, bridges, atria, architectural development, knowledge economy, design. That's what you can learn and what you can achieve after 12 months of AADRL. I mean, there's the first 6 months of workshops and tooling up. And then there's a project which we're running for a year, which is roughly, you can be proud of and show that, and you're actually surpassing many of the firms. The problem is you don't get the degrees of freedom in England to do this. But these are the kind of projects. There's another one, Lee Valley, as well as there's one right here close to Docklands I can show you. So you have diversity, richness, you have multiple layers, you have deep relief with respect to sun exposure. I'm not showing the details here. This is the one you can recognize where it is. Crossing the water and it's tough. It's a difficult site. These two sides, they're thin. How do you hold tension? How do you radiate order? How do you feel parts of belonging, yet adapting to local conditions, etc., etc. So, and this whole project, 3 people modeling everything into the interior again within AADRL in 1 year. And then we do this stuff in the office, so it feeds off. After they've done this, they come join and do that in the office. And we do these kind of knowledge economy hubs. In China, they don't like to, they don't yet attacking the revitalization of their kind of cities. So they're going a bit greenfield campus and so on. I think but still, it's important to get something dense and integral and open and communicative. This is a unicorn city, so-called in Chongqing. So unicorn meaning, a startup city. Find the next unicorn. And look, you only need to find one out of 1,000, and the profit for society and the world is massive. Imagine the amount of prosperity gain Google delivered to the globe. Whatever they're earning as a profit is only a fraction of that huge boost of everybody's well-being and productivity. So this is, and we've done this is Unicorn Tech City. We have a highway cutting right mid, so we said no. We're generating a whole plate of connection. This is unusual because we have roughly 25 buildings, the whole urbanism, beautiful waterfront, and we designed the master plan. We said we can do all of the buildings. We have the power, we have the team, we have the parametric modeling. We generate variety. There's residences, offices, retail areas, public buildings, exhibition buildings. So we've done the whole bloody thing. And there's some wonderful, massive, the whole building lifted up, cantilevering, towers, atrium, residential. And there's unity and variety. And there's this kind of big plate connecting it across the highway. We did some kind of navigation AI studies. We trained some avatars to learn from, quick navigation and what would recognizability of features which guide you through this. And it's but quite dense, yet Garden City since feeling as well. And it's been kind of delivered by a relatively small team in breakneck time. You can see it's always render, build. I mean, these are close matches. This is the first building we put out. We had a conference recently. I was speaking there. There's a showroom, lecture hall, exhibition spaces, etc. It's already finished. And I just let you see. I mean, it's that's the kind of productivity we can deliver, and the kind of variety and diversity of ideas of function, volume, facade. To have unity and variety and some degree of legibility, where's the offices, where's the residences, mixed use, etc. So we're quite proud of it. It's the biggest project so far. It's over 1 million square meter. And we believe in urbanism and architecture coming together so that architectural features do urban work in terms of orientation and semiological indication, etc., etc. Sorry. Now, the latest iteration for us is using AI, and it's particularly potent when it comes to urban developments. So every project now, we're training up a neural network. We have Stable Diffusion running in the background, which is open source. We're running our networks for each building, but also particularly for urban. If you have some color-coded map, that's not going to convince decision makers, and even you don't know yourself what you're actually proposing. So we have this whole kind of repertoire of building types of urban plans, and we can train up a model, and then we can bring it in. And you can have you can color code, okay, where's the water, where's the green, where's the roads, where's what kind of building type, and then it feeds in and generates the variations. And that's very good for generating, exploring the search space, and then judging where to go next, how to home in, and how to kind of then run subsidiary models, etc. And in the end, of course, parametrically modeling and detailing and so on and so forth. So I think that's quite potent, and you can run several models, and you can calibrate the degree, percentage by which they are impacting, or to which extent is the general Stable Diffusion model impacting, so you generate more unexpected anything goes, or you constrain it more. I think it's potent. We have we realized about 2 years ago that this is happening, so we have a whole team continuously monitoring, building tools. We're connecting with different AI companies. I'm on the board of some of them. And so you can calibrate the degree to which a generic cityscape or various other models dominate. And it's very kind of important. It's fast moving, and something which makes us, of course, very productive and competitive. Because the demand of getting even into competition now in China, for instance, to get on the shortlist, you have to get a whole photorealistically rendered sketch, inverted commas. So there's a competitive pressure is getting, without this, forget it. So I have some more interesting ideas for urban development. So this is a project we're very proud of, and we have written papers on it, and we have various explorations. This is what I call the participatory urban development platform. And I'll explain to you what it is. This is basically the first attempt. It's in Roatan, Honduras, where there's a relatively free, the city where the landowners can develop their own planning rules, totally unencumbered. Why? Because the government central government said, our bureaucracy is so corrupt, bribery, exorbitant, we need to disempower our own bureaucracies, including the courts, and give freedom to the developers and their own responsibility. So here we have a situation where we are with our clients, we are crafting the urbanism and rules of urbanization, and we say maximal freedom and participation of end users in the development process. So basically what this is, so we have the site, and this is for a residential unit, but there's also a bit of co-working, a bit of we have voxels, and people can go online. It's a 3D model. They can place reservations, and they can say, I want this voxel, my unit. I am aggregating it of a number of voxels, so I can determine how big my unit is, how many levels this way, is an L shape, is what shape, and I wanted to have these or that program in it, these rooms, and I can drop in modules and claim modules, and then anybody else coming in can see who's claimed what and say, hey, I like this guy, what he's doing, I want to be next to it, let me place this and that next to it. They can share space. So it's about synergy clusters and about degrees of freedom, so that the product, now in the current world, you have to, a developer has to invent the product mix. Actually, it's totally prescribed by the planners, because they tell you how much residential, how many floor, 4-bedroom, how many 3-bedroom, how many 2-bedroom, size of each room, need a balcony, etc., etc. Not allowed a second entrance. So in the end, it's all some kind of rule system by planners. And then you have to sell that. Good luck. I mean, it's only happening because there's so much pressure and lack of product in London that anything will be sold. And if you have to kind of subsidize half of the product by taking from some and giving to others very unfairly, then so be it. Anyway, so this is something where you should take out the kind of product market risk of product market fit, where the potential buyers or tenants configure their entity and also configure where they want it, with whom they want it, and how much they want it, and also then interior fit out and public space, etc. You can say, okay, they can make it's also meant to be, it's like a dating site. There's a kind of underlying network of messaging. Who wants to share a tennis court with me? Who wants to share a terrace with me? Who wants to wear a gym with me? So instead of having it a one gym that nobody goes to, or whatever. And so then downstream, all these modules are parametric. There's a kind of fabrication downstream integrated. So these modules are all easy to build. And then we have a kind of, we ship container with a little micro factory robotics to the place, and then off they go. And this is the kind of things you end up with. I mean, they're relatively small units, etc. But again, you can have double height spaces, or not, and you can have a very small single floor, or what have you. And you get this whole range, and you don't have to. I mean, the worst thing is, of course, the planner's telling you what you have to deliver. It takes all the fun out of the developer and of the architect. The developer can only, basically the developers here, they are only competing on gaming the system, on knowing the counselors, on negotiating down this or that. They can't compete on product because it's all fakes. But it's incredibly boring for architects and developers. So anyway, the final thing here is this kind of spin-off of this to expand and bring to London, at least fictionally, because in London you couldn't do that. The problem is this couldn't be in London because you have to, it's all fixed already. But in most other jurisdictions, you have to put in a planning application where everything is fixed. What do you mean it's going to be determined by X, Y, Z, and so on and so forth, But here, we've put this out. You can look that up. This is, Epic Games, Fortnite Creative, Reimagine London. So this is the same game but directly coming in multiplayer. I mean, it's not, and this is obviously not really to be built, unfortunately. And placing modules, and within minutes generating a whole kind of waterfront development, mixed use. And this has had enormous uptake. And there's a whole archive of solutions out there. And we're going to develop this further, and we have another client somewhere in the Middle East who is willing to apply some of that and go with some of this. But you need degrees of freedom which we should all have here, but we don't. So, and you can also, it depicts that whole part of London kind of photorealistically at scale. You can roam around it, find a spot where you want to place your ideas. And off we go. That's kind of user participation. What the next step for us wanted to be was saying, okay, this, people come in and we're negotiating with Epic, it's still there. People can go back to this and share with their friends and visit what they've done. These are all there to let them use it, which motivates them further. Do their virtual showroom, do their virtual office, do their so on and so forth. I mean, that's the idea. And that's another lecture, but we're having a whole metaverse, which we're developing, by the way, for virtual spaces. This is simulating real spaces, but they could also be used as virtual spaces. Without being built, you can use them. So. But if you kind of constrain it and you have some kind of rule systems and the repertoire which fits, you get a degree of coherency and legibility in these creations. And this is already for the next project. And the fun thing is you're straight in roaming and speaking and showing around and exploring and inhabiting, being inside the thing, if you wanted to. Real time instead of leaving text messages, seeing what's going on, navigating the space real time instead of looking up things and typing up things, etc. And finally, we have developed this kind of Zaha metaverse city for clients to show, but we can also start using it. We composed about 30 of our buildings into a 3D environment with landscape, with some of our kind of more remote buildings, looking in and this is digital twinning or anticipating or simulating. And the fun thing is the power of these kind of tools, you got all of this geometry and you can real-time go in and the level of detail, the photorealistic will satisfy any architect's heart. You know what you're presenting, what you've done. I mean, these are mostly built. Some were unbuilt, but these are the potentials for the contemporary, for the 21st century. And what I find fascinating that if you look at metaverse, but also any AI, while in the real world, and even any awards like the Zine Awards, parametrism is 0.0% of contributions. Google AI architecture, 80% is parametrism. Not yet tectonism, but we're teaching tectonism. And metaverse, it's also parametrism. So parametrism, if you look at the desire, if it's made easy, and you have the young generation playing, that's what everybody wants. That's what everybody loves. Everybody senses intuitively. That's the architecture we want. And that gives me an enormous amount of hope, because I thought I was kind of getting frustrated that parametrism seems to be kind of not taking off. I think AI and metaverse together will make this take off in the next 10 years. Jump on the train or be left behind. I mean, this is what we can do. These are, every building has the interiors, has the reflection, has the materiality, and you can roam around and explore and enjoy. And this is part of we have this metaverse, look it up, Metrotopia. This is one district of Metrotopia. Lieberland is another one. The incubator building with many kind of participants. We had virtual Venice Biennale. We have many events and for the design discipline in Metrotopia. And I think this delivers, an engine of progress, development, acceleration for architecture, which I hope will bring on parametrism and tectonism as it deserves to be taken on. Thank you.
Take any questions?
Yeah.
Sorry, wow. Thank you very much indeed, Ash, for that. Absolutely amazing. I just asked actually to take a few questions, but I know that we're running over, so don't just look at me. Do we have anyone who would like to ask a question?
Yeah.
There's an invitation for UEL, maybe represented through my favorite UEL guys. Open up a space in Metrotopia and show your stuff.
Thank you so much for your fantastic presentation. And
I hope you were seeing anything from the angle. You were listening.
all the parametrics is on, and your meta was, what do you think about the digital fabrication and modularity in the, like, to control carbon footprint and for the environment?
First of all, digital fabrication, of course, is massively important. That's the underpinning. That's the underpinning of making this architecture real. And it's been very important that the discipline, our discipline, has invested in this for the last 15 years in developing and pushing the industry. Like we also have been pushing the engineers. They've been too shy, they've been too much in the background. Draw something and I come later and do some kind of structure behind the envelope, which somehow makes us work, even though it's irrationally. So that was the wrong kind of hierarchy between architecture and engineering. So engineering integration is super important, and they need to come in early and come in strongly, but also there's a whole range of opportunities in engineering. So you need to orchestrate and select with respect to social functionality and architectural purposes. The same with fabrication is enormously important. But of course it's tough if you invest a whole school is invested for a decade, or your career is in building these end effectors and robotics and G-code skills. In the division of labor, that's okay, but there needs to be others who are thinking ahead of what are the goals, what we need this complexity and adaptiveness for, and convince people that this is generating value and this kind of legibility, connectivity. That's very important. So I've been saying, parametrism 2.0 was about social functionality, not only technology. That's very important. So technology is very important, but it's not number one. It's required, but once you've got it roughly, go back to developing the goals in the cycle. Sustainability is very similar, and I wanted to try that notion. So I think there's a massive overemphasis on sustainability in our field, to the point that it consumes nearly all the airtime of every course, of every conference, and it's so easy. And how much innovation can there be that it consumes, you have 50 conferences, they all have, sustainability engine. Now, carbon footprint is a cost, right? It's the cost side. What about the benefit side? If you emphasize so much minimizing the cost of what? Maybe you shouldn't build at all. Then be most optimized. The assumption, if you emphasize only minimizing cost of carbon and so on, you presume that the goal, what we're creating and costing out and minimizing, is trivial, not worth discussion, not worth debating, not worth querying, exploring, presenting, because 95% of the discourse is on the cost side. So we're presuming the benefit side is clear, the product side is clear, because it's taken for granted. It's what we've always been doing. The same stuff we've been doing, we keep doing, we just do it cheaper on the carbon side. Now that is a monumental loss of opportunity. It's crazily irrational, and I'll tell you why. If you go to a kind of Google campus or some place like this, and they were blind, they said, we need to find somebody who can deliver zero carbon for our campus. You don't want to know how the campus might look, how productive it is, how much you bring 20,000 people onto a site, and they miss each other, run away from each other. There's 50 entrances and 250 meeting rooms to be gathered and arranged. By the way, I'm not talking about we have simulation tools where we simulating occupancy with thousands of agents, depicting a workforce with differentiation and looking at encounter frequencies of the right type, conversion of encounters into communications, etc., various types of communications, and using all these. And we can see that these kind of compositions are way better than blind grids. So you make this investment, zero carbon, and you are wasting, but the real estate cost also for something like this is actually relatively minor compared to the running cost. There, sustainability comes in, but it's only one aspect, and the salary costs. And the opportunity cost of not having all this research development, all these apps, all these wonderful new products rolled out faster, because that's where the real value is. So that's my answer to this. So it's an important reflection. Once you know what you should be building, how this should look like and function socially and be legible and easy and bringing people together, then you can pose a question on how we can minimize cost to creating that. And interesting, in many ways, the parametricism and tectonics in particular has already inbuilt efficiencies. Because if we develop, which is not picked up, we have material optimization. Our steel structures are half the weight. When we do brise-soleils, we can optimize and not have it everywhere and the same. Environmental engineering logics, structural logics, fabrication logics are embedded in this. And this means all leads to solutions which are not endless grids, endless boxes, flat slabs, posts, which are monumentally wasteful. So already know if I have the right repertoire, I'm doing more. But I think I'm emphasizing the benefit side. The cost side comes in, but we have been emphasizing cost to that extent. And as I said, the end result is we're implying that the benefit side, or what we want to gain out of development and what this development looks like, is taken for granted, not being worked on. And that's a monumental mistake.
Can we take one more?
But it's much easier to kind of...
I heard you say you want everyone to embrace parametrism and it's like new architecture firms are embracing tools like AI and parametrism to design. Don't you think that we could potentially be losing like architectural heritage and like identities in cities? For example, London is like a Victoria Square and all of that. If we just impose parametrism, which is, it has all its benefits, don't you think we risk losing historical credits and like in terms of just like identity of cities? Because now we can have a situation where it's, in terms of like architectural identity, it's hard to tell apart cities like Singapore from New York from London. And don't you think like potentially if we get to a point where these tools can like can like properly recreate architectural sceneries in a very immersive way, that we wouldn't feel as much the loss of like this architectural heritage?
Well, but which architectural heritages? Are you going back to it's not like some do, the brutalism of the modernism? They're nostalgic about that. Some people want to go back to the 19th century, the kind of neo-historicism, and like that. Others want to go further back to the medievalism. I mean, where do you go? These nostalgias, they just kill you. If you indulge in nostalgia, why don't you also go back to old mores and rites and ways of life and old ideologies? They're just dysfunctional, they're non-adaptive, and the costs are ginormous. I mean, the city which you might love was an era of bone-breaking poverty. Bone-breaking poverty, short lives, brutal lives, claustrophobic lives, where you were controlled by your family structures, etc. So that's the problem. I mean, of course, I'm not against heritage and preserving for memory, and you can also reutilize and give a certain ambience and use that as a differentiating and tool, etc. I'm familiar and happy with all of this, but you can't give over the, let's say, generation of the vital living stratum to a kind of nostalgic preconception. Because when you look at it, you feel warm in your heart and you feel kind of a bit of a tingle, but you're going to be bone-breakingly poor. In your own life as well, you can say, well, I like this kind of countryside, I want to sit here, I want to, do a bit of farming here and there. I mean, you can do that personally, but you're relying then on the metropolis delivering the fertilizers, delivering the, all the kind of biotech advantages and etc., which allow you to do that, etc. So this is not a generalizable, universalizable outlook. If you retire, yes, you kind of work, and now you want to be you can consume. I mean, I'm not against holiday places where you want to kind of escape being a nostalgic village. And when you have it quiet and you have your nice services, they're all kind of hidden, or you consume at the end of your life what you produce. But of course, that's not generalizable. We can't all do that. So these are exceptions. I mean, I never want to retire, by the way. And when I'm on holiday, I'm equally eager to communicate and stay in touch and meet people. And yes, and I also like the pool, and but then you go clubbing afterwards. So I don't know. I mean, for me that doesn't exist. For many people that might. So for that, and what is interesting in the city of London, let's say the square mile. It's there are some charming nooks and crannies we can reutilize for a small little bar, for a private club, And there's a church you can go into, but it's if you feel like it, and to contemplate, not and have a moment of rest, but it's not, it's 5%, and you might dislike the fact that you're coming out of this church and you have these towers and deep buildings where the thing is happening and pumping all around, but that's what we need. I mean, that's what we need to live. I mean, so we can't be just, oh, I like this, being, let's say, blissfully ignorant about, what sustains your actual prosperity. That you can go down order an Uber and have a nice curry, or either gratify yourself with grabbing a sandwich and popping a fresh juice and going on the app and saying, I want to fly to Australia. Okay, off we go, Uber, and I'm here. 5 nice movies, new stimulation, 3 meals, 3 naps, bang, I'm here in Melbourne. I mean, that takes something. There's a whole civilization. And this is created by the Ubers, Googles, all these corporates, and they need space. And if they haven't sit in a space where it's all kind of zero carbon bunkers, nobody means everybody, there's lack of communication, there's lack of participation, you miss everything, you run down empty corridors, then you have to be shipped 3 hours with a bus, to San Fran. I mean, there's so much waste. With the wrong environments, with the wrong architecture, with the wrong urbanism, which is why we're not growing, we should be growing 5%, not 0.5%. That you don't notice in 1 year, but in 25 years? It's like tripling everything you have for half the work. Wow. No, and we have done that. It used to be child labor from the age of 7, and you're burned out at 29. Now you just barely get started at the age of 27. And you might, if you've been super productive, why don't you retire at 50 and enjoy life, or give back to charity and do your pet projects? Isn't it wonderful? So, but there's something which it takes, and it takes the metropolis of a certain type.
But what we witness here is a kind of deviation between what we are trying to pursue as architects and what actually gets built. So, although the parameters can be a new global style, I think it's clashing towards the way developers and the construction industry wants to go. Because you see around here in the city, even here in the east area where they are building the most, there's a proliferation of buildings which are, just pure modernist buildings, because they need to maintain the cost. saying before, that until the construction industry will start to fully embrace digital fabrication of processes where the amount of material and the optimization of geometry will give an advantage, we'll never see a full establishment of parametric design as the mainstream style.
No, but it will happen. I mean, look at, for instance, Philip Block Research Group. They have a non-steel, super light, super rigid, lightweight slab, 10-meter long, cast, precast. I mean, these kind of products, it's just the lack of leadership in the field. The discipline must lead. We need to internally discuss the best way, best practice, and we need to critique these backwardness. And the problem is also politics. If the politics prescribes everything, the incentive to innovate isn't there. But in other cities, China, India, etc., it is still there, Singapore. So, but I think it's really a question of leadership, of discourse in the lead, and bringing that on, and then making everybody aware of these options, of the advantages. The problem is this: at the moment, this sliver of researchers, these universities, these few firms, it's a drop in the ocean. We need the whole of the field, the whole of the universities, the whole of the industries getting it on, and we will be there in a few years, and generalize this, and the advantages will become patent, and you get global best practice. It's like in the 1960s, everything was modernism, on a new level of modernism. Everybody is buying in. There was a total remaking of the physiognomy of the built environment, but also of the discipline, and that is lacking. Now it's fragmented and problematic and closed down. So I think it's a question of the discipline leading, and first of all, we leading the discipline. Will we do it? I think we will.
Fantastic.